Okay, so welcome to the week 4 go-to session. This is the first session of 2 that we'll have this week. This week's focus will mostly be a sort of topic selection or a topic focus on the issue of copyright, though I do want to make some quick reminders before we get into that. Also, there will be one more session, which is on Thursday. I encourage people to show up for that session. For some reason, the very last lab session of the month tends to be the least populated in terms of attendance, but it's also typically the shortest. I usually keep these sessions around an hour, but the final one usually runs shorter than that just because I don't have as much stuff to go through except to say goodbye to everyone and to go over the final assignment. So Thursday, I think it's willing to make the investment to show up for the 30 or 40 minutes that the session might last, just because the final assignment for this course, which I'll go over in Thursday's session, is actually pretty. I mean, it's in depth. It takes quite a bit of effort, but it's much simpler in terms of you're not going to be taking screenshots. You're not going to be running to the full sail databases. You're mostly going to be answering questions. So, but I still like to go over the assignments so people don't get confused or make mistakes. So please don't blow off Thursday. Okay. Also, don't blow off the rest of the stuff that's due this week. What I have open here is the activities page for week 4. So you can see there are a couple discussions, one on the moral operating system and another one, which I think is fascinating, how YouTube thinks about copyright, and this is why I want to talk about copyright in today's session. But don't forget about, it's only a 5% assignment, but it is an activity to complete, the digital literacy vision, which is sort of the exact same thing you did in week 1, but you're just going to do it now that you've had more than 3 weeks of course content presented to you. So you can read through the assignment sheet on your own, but basically, it gives you the gist here that in week 1 you shared your vision of your digital identity, but now you're going to update this vision based on kind of what you've learned during the month. So essentially you're going to create a new vision that now represents who you think you are after having gone through 3.5 weeks of digital literacy at Full Sail University. And pretty much, if you look at the rubric, it sort of covers what you need to do. So you'll need to have an updated vision, right? Something that's image-based or video-based. Basically, you'll be using, again, the Web 2.0 tool somehow to kind of create what you see as your new digital identity. And then the rest of it's much the same. You'll have a written explanation that's hopefully thoughtful and somewhat in-depth. You'll respond in an engaging way with at least 2 of your classmates, and then you'll be sure to follow the basics of grammar and mechanics. So, well, Joshua, hopefully something's changed. I mean, maybe you haven't changed that much, but maybe, for example, the terminology you would draw upon would be different. For example, in week 1, there are lots of people who create visions that are very, 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 very specific. Like it's all gaming terms or it's all brand names. And after 3 weeks or so, maybe they're a bit more, they have a richer idea of everything that's informing them. Basically, you should be going in and doing something again. I mean, even if you don't think that you've changed, and for the most part, students do learn quite a bit from week 1 to week 4, but even if you think you're special and haven't, still, the assignment is to kind of create a new vision. So at least come up with something different that we can examine and look at. Okay, so there are a couple discussions you have to participate in, and then the sort of update of that week 1 assignment on digital literacy. But today I want to talk about copyright, because this is an important issue, and most of you will get more in-depth discussions of copyright issues when you get further into your field of study. I think I've asked this of, I see mostly the same people in the sessions week to week, but just real quickly, if people could go ahead and type in the chat box what you're here at Full Sail to study. I remember some of yours, but I can't remember all of them. But the reason I ask this is because I'm guessing that most of your fields do touch on copyright issues. So you're going to face them at some point in your studies and your career. Okay, so game art, game development. How about some of the other people? Okay, Garrett Recording Arts. Good. Yeah. Anything dealing with music, your copyright is very important. Chanda is in film. Kanina also music production. Okay, so all of those areas do kind of deal with copyright. So that's why I spend a lot of time talking about this because Full Sail is a very, very different kind of school. Most of our areas of study will have something to do. You'll encounter copyright at some point in your studies, but I like to give a brief overview here. So here's what we'll cover in this session. First of all, the basics of copyright, and then we'll get into fair use because fair use is a concept that a lot of people don't quite get because students will sometimes they'll hand in a project and it will have like a Rihanna song playing in the background. And I say, no, you can't do that. And they'll say, oh, sure I can. It's fair use. I'm just using a part of the song. I'm not. It's like, no, that's not fair use. So we'll go over what fair use is. And then we'll get into some more kind of terms that you've probably heard and maybe you already know about these things. But if you don't, they're useful to understand, like Creative Commons, what royalty-free means, because royalty-free isn't really free. It's kind of the opposite of free, but that can cause confusion. And then issues like public domain. And then we'll just, if people have any questions at the end, we'll get to that. Okay, so copyright. Most of you kind of understand, I think, the gist of what copyright is, right? That anything you create has to be properly registered through a copyright office for a fee. I believe the fee is around $50. Okay, so if there's anything that you create that you feel you need to have protected, you should get it officially copyrighted. And if you make any changes to the item that's under copyright, it needs to be copyrighted again. And it gets complicated too. For example, if I write a story, I don't typically go out and copyright it. First of all, if we're ever to get published somewhere, then it would be automatically copyrighted typically through the publication. So there are ways that things get copyrighted without you actually having to run the copyright office. But we've heard that term copyright, so we know in essence what it means. But a couple things that people sometimes don't realize. First, again, use of copyright material without permission is called infringement. But a couple things people think they believe are true but aren't. First, there's no such thing as the so-called 8-second rule. Sometimes students have heard of this term, sometimes they haven't. It's basically something of like an urban legend. The belief that if we only use a tiny portion of something, that we don't get nailed for infringement, and that's not true at all. For example, if you take even a single trumpet note from somewhere, but that trumpet note is identifiable, it's unmistakable, it would be difficult to believe that a single note could have that kind of power. But sometimes there are pieces written where you just can tell by the way it's played or the way the note lingers or something. You can tell, oh, that comes from that famous recording. Like even a single note taken somewhere can be copyright infringement. So there's this false belief that if I'm not using the whole thing, just a tiny part, that's not copyright violation. It can be. The second urban myth is what's called the poor man's copyright. Now that we're getting farther and farther away from the world of snail mail, right? Putting an envelope on a stamp on an envelope and putting it out to be picked up. That's practically. I mean, it still exists, but we're moving so far away from it. I no longer care about checking my mailbox because it's no longer a big deal. But there used to be this belief that if you wanted to avoid paying the fee for a copyright, that all you had to do was take whatever you wanted copywritten. So, for example, maybe a screenplay that you wrote, or maybe the musical notes for the song that you wrote, or the lyrics for the song that you wrote. Put it in an envelope, lick a stamp, slap it on, address it to yourself, and that would be the same as copyright protection. Because then you could go to a court of law and say, no, I really did write this. Because look, it's got the date stamp on it through the U.S. Postal Service, and it's never been opened, and it proves that that I created this before this other person stole it. As logical as that technique sounds, unfortunately, it doesn't really hold up in a court of law. Has anybody heard of that, by the way? The kind of U.S. mail trick, or what I call a poor man's copyright. Okay, Nina's heard of it. Yeah, usually I have a couple students have heard of it. It's sort of like I heard it from a teacher 20 years ago, it's something that gets kind of passed on and on and on. I don't think it's a terrible idea if you just want, I don't know, to confront someone with proof that you created it or something, but it's risky to do in terms of expecting it to hold up in a court of law. So be careful of that. It's pretty important just to get something copyrighted outright. Okay, again, most of you know this stuff, so here are examples of things that are typically copyrightable. So I put them into different genres or types of creative works. So literary, so novels, poems, articles. Software, believe it or not, falls under this category because software is written in code, and code uses characters, and for that reason it typically usually falls under the category of literary, even though you don't really read software the way you read a book. Music, of course, so songs, jingles, beats, that gets controversial because we're getting into that area where at what point is a beat truly original? At what point do we have to cite something? At what point can we use a found beat, etc.? But even beats are kind of falling under the category of things that can be copyrighted. Dramatic works, so plays, performances, musicals, opera. Note that this is like in addition to the music category. So musicals will have individual songs that could be copyrighted on their own, but the entire work, the dramatic work, is also copyrighted. Choreography, believe it or not, very, very specific dances that someone took the time to create, those can be copyrighted. The same thing for pictorial, so paintings, photography, graphics, graphic arts, which can range from anything from comics to other sorts of sketches, sculptures, sound recordings. So this is different than music in the sense that sometimes lectures can be copyrighted. If someone famous comes to your local college and gives a speech that's recorded, that might be copyrighted. Radio broadcasts are typically copyrighted. So if you're I don't think anybody listens to the radio anymore, but if you're a big fan of, I don't know, Howard Stern or something, you can't just record the show and distribute it for free. That's copyrighted as well. And then, as we all know, motion pictures and television are copyrighted. Note that this is different than other areas that aren't copyrightable, but still are usually under the protection of a different sort. Typically trademarks or patents. So, for instance, names, titles, short phrases, or slogans typically aren't copyrightable. It depends. Titles in general are not copyrightable. So, in the 1930s, for instance, there was a big song called Dancing in the Dark, but that has no connection whatsoever with a song Bruce Springsteen recorded in the 1980s called Dancing in the Dark. And yet Bruce Springsteen is not going to be sued because he came up with that title. Titles tend to repeat, so they're not typically covered under copyright protection. The Beatles had a famous album called Let It Be, and then some 25 years later, a punk band released a record called Let It Be, and they were able to do that. That was kind of their point. Being, all punk rock and all that stuff, to sort of go against the grain and purposely choose one of the most famous records of all time and use that as their title. So titles typically aren't protected. When it comes to like short phrases and slogans, it depends. If it's a well-known slogan, it can be trademarked. So what was Nike's slogan? Was theirs "Just Do It," or am I confusing that with someone else? Or what's McDonald's, like "I'm loving it," or something like that. So sometimes those individual slogans can be trademarked, which means you can get in a lot of trouble if you start using them. There was a really sad story of some guy out in Vermont who was just selling T-shirts that said "Eat More Kale," like the vegetable kale, K-A-L-E. And Chick-fil-A tried to sue him because they have their "Eat More Chicken" slogan. Which is really odd because the guy wasn't, he wasn't creating T-shirts that had a cartoon carrot holding up a sign that said "Eat More Kale" with the letters spelled backwards. Because that's sort of the joke with Chick-fil-A, that the cows are holding up signs because they prefer people to eat chicken, because that would mean we wouldn't be eating hamburgers and thus saving the cows their lives. It's a ridiculous commercial thing, but you've all seen it, right? And yet they went after this guy in Vermont just because he was creating T-shirts that said "Eat more kale," um, which became controversial because at what point does the slogan? I mean, we understand that unique, original slogans can be trademarked, but can a company really own the words "eat more"? Those two words? Uh, I don't think so. But that was kind of a story that hit the news about a year ago. Ingredients, ideas, and procedures. These are typically things that, if they are protected, they're going to be patented. So if a surgeon comes up with a very, very specific technique, that might be patented. Familiar symbols or designs, if those are protected, they're usually protected by trademark. So think of like the Nike swoosh or the Apple logo, right? The sort of outline or silhouette of an apple with a bite taken out of it. And in general, you shouldn't be using these things in your projects. I mean, I tend to turn a blind eye when a student accidentally does it before we get to the copyright discussion. But you shouldn't even be taking these familiar logos like the Coca-Cola script and using them in your projects, because these are actually trademark protected things. Okay, so we get into this issue of fair use. Fair use is a concept that lots of students have heard of, but they're sometimes confused about. At its gist, it's really this, that reproduction of copyrighted material might be considered fair use if you're using it for criticism, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, or research. So let me give like a really obvious example of this. You turn on the television, and there's someone who's giving a 5-minute movie review on your local news station or some sort of national news magazine type program. Right, someone comes on and gives like a 5-minute movie review of a film that just came out. What's come out recently? I can't remember what's come out in the theaters. Is there any big movie that's come out recently? There's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I don't think that was that big though. But anyway, we'll use that. So okay, Galaxy Guardians. Okay, that's a better example. So someone's doing a review of that movie. They may use images from the movie. They might show like a 10-second clip or something while they're giving the review. That's fair use, because you're just using, not only are you just using a small part of it, but you're not sort of, you're using it for reasons that you need to rely on the movie, in other words, at some level to sort of review it, especially in a visual medium like television. And the same thing goes for like teaching. Like I've taught introduction to film before, so not only will I show clips of the film, but we have screenings of the individual films that are being taught. Again, that's allowed because it's part of the curriculum. Like our class wasn't designed to just distribute movies. It's not like we had a Guardians of the Galaxy night where we just showed a pirated copy of the film. No. We took films that have been around for a while, and for educational purposes, it became part of the curriculum. Or think of the way that if you write a book review, you might quote certain passages from the novel that you're reviewing, but you're not reproducing the work. So usually fair use applies to these things. Now, it gets a little complicated because you go on YouTube and you see lots of people posting like their favorite song with lyrics that appear on the screen. They're called lyric videos, right? Because they don't have the right to just show an official video or something like that. They don't have that material. But they'll post their favorite song with the lyrics kind of scrolling across the screen. And lots of times, like the person who posted the video has a statement that says, I do not own this work, but I'm posting it under fair use guidelines. And the weird thing is, I don't even know if that really qualifies as fair use. I mean, they don't own the song. And especially, like, you'll sometimes even see videos where people are putting up their own collage of images. It's almost like a slideshow. So they'll put on, I don't know, John Legend's All of Me. Is it All of Me or All of You? What's the name of that song? It's like the song of the year, and now I'm forgetting if it's All of Me or All of You. But like they'll put up that song, and it will be accompanied by like a slideshow of, I don't know, romantic pictures of the person took on a recent holiday, or maybe they'll have pictures of John Legend and his wife, because I think he's married. And it's like, no, you can't do that. John Legend may not want his music to be used in that kind of way. So be aware of this, because, yeah, lots of people claim fair use, but it's not necessarily fair use, especially if the copyright holder decides to make trouble. And by the way, the TED Talk discussion on YouTube and copyright is really fascinating because it gets into these issues. It shows an example of someone's wedding video that uses a song. I forget which song it is. I apologize for that. But the thing they brought up is that the copyright holder could have went after them. They could have said, listen, you don't own that song, and you don't have the right to use that song in that way. But they didn't, because they realized that this video, which had gone viral, actually was doing wonders for the song. And in a second, we'll get to how money issues are really the driving force here when it comes to copyright enforcement. If someone feels like they're going to be losing profit on what you're doing, they'll typically step in. If not, they won't. So I think that's why so much stuff on YouTube doesn't really necessarily get taken down, because I doubt that John Legend really cares that someone put up his song with lyrics scrolling across the screen. I mean, it only benefits him, right? Or I doubt he cares that someone put together sort of a John Legend tribute with his song playing in a sort of collage of images of him appearing on the screen, right? I mean, you could step in to try to stop that, but why bother? But technically, I don't think it really falls under fair use. Finally, the last bullet here, that we're really talking about using select portions of something to comment on, critique, or parody something, okay? So think of the way that Saturday Night Live can parody a specific television show or a film, or think of all those movies like Scary Movie, right, where it's pretty clear what they're parodying, but they're allowed to do that. Or Weird Al Yankovic. He's been out of the public spotlight for the longest time. Now he's back in it because his most recent record is doing really well. I mean, the reason he can get away with basically redoing Robin Thicke's Blurred Lines, which itself is under copyright a lawsuit problem, is that you're allowed to do so by parody. Josh says something, doesn't he get slapped for the beat? I don't know what that means, doesn't he get slapped for the beat? Like, does he get in trouble? No. Parody falls under copyright infringement. It's the same way, like I said, like those Scary Movie, all those movies that have come out, like there was one that made fun of 300, there was one that made fun of, I don't know. Like, they can get away with pretty, like, mocking certain films that we all know about, just for that reason, because parody falls under fair use. Because we'll get to it in a second why parody kind of falls under that category. And I think it might be on the next slide, actually. Or maybe the one after that. Yeah, the fair use is a defense against a claim of copyright infringement. Okay, so someone might charge you with copyright infringement, and you can claim fair use. But if you don't successfully argue fair use, then it's considered infringement. And here's the point I want to make. There are 4 issues that are considered typically by the courts regarding fair use. The first is the purpose and character of your use. That's a little bit difficult to describe, but basically, how you're using it. So if you think again back to my movie review example, where sometimes people do video game reviews where they show parts of the game. Again, that's kind of part of the purpose and character. The nature of the copyrighted work can come into play. The amount of the portion that you use, right? So there's a big difference between, for example, showing a couple seconds, like 10, 15 seconds of a movie while you're giving a movie review online or on television, and just showing a complete version of a film that's currently in theaters and then saying at the end, oh, I love this movie, thumbs up. Like, that's not fair use. That's just you showing a movie that you shouldn't be showing and calling it a review. But the last one I really want to stress is the effect of the use on the potential market. Again, money talks. I don't like that reality, but it kind of does. So copyright infringement really doesn't become a big issue for people unless people see it potentially biting into their profit margins. Like I said, Beyonce or John Legend or Kesha, they're not really going to come after people on YouTube for creating their own sort of collage videos because A, it's probably too much trouble, and B, it's actually helping them. I mean, think about it. What are the huge songs right now? There's that Iggy Azalea song, Fancy. What are some of the other ones I like? I like that Bang 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 song with Jessie J and Nicki Minaj and Ariana Grande. I love that song. But think of it, if you have lots of people, like an army of people, all posting their individual sort of either lyric videos or collage videos on YouTube, I mean, how is that not helping the song? I mean, if you're Boom Clap by Charlie, what's her last name? I forget. But I like that song too, Boom Clap. Like, why would you descend on all these people who are basically giving your song free publicity? Like the best publicity you could ever possibly imagine. Like the official videos sometimes have like 100 million views, but sometimes these lyric videos that someone slapped together in 2 seconds probably, some of them have like 10, 20 million views. Like that can only help the artist. So why would the artist or the publishing company or the record label step in to try and stop that? However, if it does have an effect on the potential market, then they'll step in really, really quickly, especially if you're making money off of something that you've done. Now, we only have one gaming person here, but this has been a controversy recently online with gaming. You'd be amazed, but people love to watch video game walkthroughs. They like to watch video game reviews. They like to watch video game tournaments. Sometimes they just like to watch people playing video games. And for the most part, a lot of companies have no problem with that because, again, it's sort of like free marketing. It's just giving more attention to the games themselves. But Nintendo, and I've heard they've been softening up, or they're thinking about softening up, but they've actually been pretty strict in terms of really targeting anybody who's showing, imagery or walkthroughs based on their very, very specific games. So there's an industry too where sometimes specific companies like Nintendo will step in to try to put a stop to things. Back to the music example, John Legend might step in if in some way you're making money off of his work, like maybe your collage video is appearing on its own site with lots of advertising that's linked to it, and it turns out you're making quite a bit of money from that, then yeah, expect John Legend or his representatives to step in and put a stop to that, because they're literally losing money too. And there are lots of like in-between things that we can't quite get into that are really interesting. Like, there's nothing that prevents you from doing a cover song. Like, you can film yourself playing guitar or playing piano, singing your favorite song. You can upload it. There's no problem with that. Same thing with bands. Whether you're a tiny band that's just playing for fun, or whether you're a big-name artist, you're allowed to go on stage and cover other people's songs. But when there's a profit factor involved, that's when you have to acknowledge and respect people's copyrights, and usually give the copyright holder a cut of the profits. So if you don't just cover a song on YouTube, but you find a way to release it at a price through like iTunes or something, then you're kind of crossing a line. But all this falls under fair use, so it's a little bit more complicated than people think. And actually, this will be a good transition into Creative Commons, because we're living in a really, really weird time right now, okay? It used to be, and this kind of relates to one of those earlier TED Talk videos, remember the one about journalism? How there used to be this clear division between the sort of gatekeepers of information and those who received information, but now you have all these people who are in between, all these people, snapping photos with their phones, or tweeting things live, and then journalists have to figure out whether it's trustworthy or not. Well, this whole sort of redefining the landscape also applies to the issue of copyright in some ways. I mean, in the past, it would be pretty simple, the copyright issue. If you were using something, no matter big or small, that wasn't yours, you could expect people to descend upon you. But now we're in this weird environment where, people have to decide, is it best to come down on this YouTube video and tell them to stop? Or should we just let it go because it's actually helping us? We're kind of in that weird period right now. And also sort of piggybacking on what I said last week when we were talking about digital citizenship. Remember, I had made this sort of statement that in today's world, 2014, it's not just about knowing how to use digital tools, but actually creating things with them. So it's not about just knowing how to open up Microsoft Word and type a document, or open up your mail program and send an email. People now create things, and because people create things all the time, big and small, we really need resources more than ever before. Images, sound files, short clips, video clips, what have you. But what do you do if you don't have access to those things? I mean, yes, you could take photos yourself, and that's always awesome and preferable in some ways, to control every aspect of the thing that you're creating. But what if you have to put a presentation together for your job? Or like I do in these go-to sessions. Tonight is like the first session. I don't have images, but my sessions. Typically I have images. Now, do I want to grab a camera every time I have to hold a go-to session and walk around town taking photos that I think are going to be appropriate, and then cleaning them up? No, I'm going to use hopefully things that are available. And the great thing is, because the world is so sort of more ambiguous now because of technology, luckily people have responded. Yeah, integrated is also a good term, Joshua. And Creative Commons has come along recently to help with this thing. Creative Commons is an actual organization. It's a nonprofit devoted to expanding the number of creative works available to others, legally and to share. Basically, and this is a cool point, that Creative Commons was invented to create a more flexible copyright model, basically replacing all rights reserved with some rights reserved. And that's really, really helpful because, again, if you need to throw together a presentation, or you need to do something, you need to create something, but it's not the sort of thing that you want to build entirely from scratch. It's awesome now that we have these resources out there that we can use. For example, let me just give a quick... In week 1, when you did your digital identity assignment, remember you weren't allowed to use any images that weren't your own, and there was a reason for this. A, you didn't yet know where to go for allowable images. Now you've learned about the AP Images database. I'm going to teach you about one more. You won't really be able to use it in this class, but maybe in future classes you'll keep it in mind. It's called compfight.com. It's a Flickr search tool. And what's really cool about this is we can just search for photos. For example, I'll say students. And what we get are a whole bunch of what I call allowable photos. Okay? So, let me see if I can just find one to click on here. Oh. This is one I've used in a presentation. I can't remember if I've used this in this class before. But I like this one, the facepalm, facepalm photo. But you can see, here's the copyright, some rights reserved. So basically, I can use this photo in a presentation. I just have to give credit, okay? You can either use the full HTML, or usually what I'll do is I'll just go in and grab the URL to give credit to it. And the cool thing is, it's much like AP. So if I click on the photo itself, it goes to my download area. And then, when I want to, for example, I'll go back to my PowerPoint thing. Come on. I'll go back to my PowerPoint thing, insert a new slide, and then I can just drag in my photo that I just downloaded, if I can find it quickly. So there's my photo. I just need to put in my photo credit. I won't. Usually I like to type something like photo credit, but I'm just going to be fast and move it down here. And boom! Now I'd clean this up, obviously. I just threw it in there. But there's a photo that I'm allowed to use, okay? Because it's some rights reserved, not all rights reserved. And it exists because we now have this sort of more Creative Commons mindset. There's an understanding among people that there's a demand now for images, for sound files, for all these sorts of things. And if the internet is really going to be robust, if as many people are going to be able to participate as we'd like, again, we're getting into digital access issues, then it benefits everyone if we have sort of these shared materials that we can all use. So that's really cool. I mean, I use Comfight all the time for my go-to sessions in terms of picking images to use. Josh mentioned something about stock photos. We're going to get to those in just a second. Technically, when you go to Comfight, anything above this dotted line are stock photos. These are things you have to pay for. This is actually an example of royalty issues, which we're going to get into in just one second. But Creative Commons is an actual organization. So if you go to the Creative Commons org.site and click on licenses, like you can see all the different license types there are. I'm not going to go into all of them. But you can see, I think there are like, 9 of them. Now my Mac is being slow. I'm getting the pinwheel death. Okay, so I mean, I think there are like 9 different licenses here, ranging from the least restrictive. This license lets people distribute, remix, tweak, build upon, even use commercially. Okay, as long as you give credit to the creation. So this is the most flexible. Like you can take whatever this person is using under this license and basically use it for your own business, your own song, your own whatever, and make money off of it, and that's perfectly fine. But then, of course, there's the most restrictive. Attribution, non-commercial, no derivs. So this license, it tells you, is the most restrictive, and only allows you to download works and share them with others as long as you credit them. Okay, but you can't change it. You can't use it in any of your projects. You certainly can't make money on it. All you can do is share it with other people. And if you do, you still have to give it credit. So if you're ever curious, just go to the creativecommons.org site, and you can see the range of Creative Commons licenses. But the gist here is the same, that the reason why we have these types of licenses and a full range of them is to sort of provide a world in which we can all share things and sometimes adapt things, create things, tweak things, so that we can fully participate in a world that demands that we use these things. Okay, it's not fair. If only the photographers and the musicians are able to create things, we all should be able to. Okay, where was I in my presentation? Okay, so Creative Commons, oddly, that's the stuff that's free. Okay, the photo that I just showed you of the facepalm woman, okay, that's free. All I have to do is download the photo and give credit to it, and boom, I can use it in my presentation or what have you for free. Royalty-free is a different beast entirely, in part because it's not free. There's nothing free about it. It just means that you're free from doing something else, but the actual thing isn't free. Basically, when we talk about media forms, so music, graphics, photos, etc., royalty-free means you buy it, you purchase it, but it's a one-time fee. And once you pay that fee, then you're allowed to use it pretty much any way that you want. Sometimes there are certain restrictions, but you're basically allowed to use it without having to pay royalties. That's where the royalty-free part comes in. So I'm not going to take us back to the site, but the Comfight image site, which I just showed, everything above that dotted line, I don't know if you could see it, but it said professional stock photos starting at $1. Actually, you know what? Screw it. I am going to show it. If it's still open. Okay, so all this stuff up here, right? And you can tell they're usually better quality photos, or if they're not better quality, you can tell that they're sort of already produced in such a way that's sort of tailor-made for an ad or a presentation, right? Lots of perfectly framed photos, lots of smiling people. And it says stock photos start from $1, so they could be more expensive. But the awesome thing is, if you purchase one of these photos, okay, so let's say you like this one of the group of kids smiling, once you pay for that photo, it's essentially yours. Okay, you can do with it pretty much what you want because you've, in essence, purchased it. That's what royalty-free is. Because typically, when you're dealing with things, music is a good example. You'll have to pay ongoing royalties. Like this is a big issue in hip hop music, right? If you sample someone's famous song or a part of someone's famous song, you have to then pay that person what's called royalties, which is just a fancy way of saying ongoing payments to the creator. Okay? I mentioned hip hop because this is probably the most famous example. Although it also comes up in EDM music, it can also appear in even straight genres like rock. But hip hop is where this has been most controversial. Um, a lot of you are young, but you've probably heard of Two Live Crew, right? This rap band from the early '90s. Um, they had a song that was being sued for copyright infringement, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And believe it or not, Two Live Crew won simply because the passage in question, which was a riff on the famous Roy Orbison song "Pretty Woman," the court ruled that it was parody, kind of like what Weird Al Yankovic does with other people's works, but he does it over an entire song. But the ruling was is that even though it used a small portion that sounded like Pretty Woman in the Two Live Crew song, that small section was functioning as parody. But, and here's the important part, the most recent rulings have actually been going against people who infringe on copyrights. Um, people are chatting up in the chat. Nina says, so since it's yours, if someone else uses it, can they get in trouble by you? I'm not sure I understand the question. If it's yours, and if someone else uses it, can they get in trouble with you? I mean, yeah, I guess. I mean, if you created something and someone else uses it without your permission, then yeah, absolutely they can get in trouble with you because they're supposed to be paying you royalties. So think of, Kanye West regularly uses samples. I forget, there was, what's that song? Unlike Josh, I do like hip hop. That song from Late Registration, Touch the Sky, right? Do you know that song, Touch the Sky? I think if I remember correctly, it samples a pretty memorable part from a Curtis Mayfield song. So he has to pay royalties to Curtis Mayfield. I think Curtis Mayfield, I hate to say that people are dead if they're not. I want to say he's no longer with us. But he would have to pay royalties to the copyright holder or the Mayfield family or whoever. But but if it's a recognizable thing, even if you're just using it on a loop, or even if it's just a 5-second thing, if it's the heart of the song, if it's a recognizable part of the song, that's why I said sometimes even a single trumpet note could be identifiable if it's so famously known. You have to pay royalties for that. I'm trying to keep up with what people are saying in the chat. When hip hop mixes with the EDM epic. Yeah, we're in a weird thing now. Like I'm kind of obsessive with music, so I try to keep up with the top 40. I even try to keep up with the country charts. My area of kind of expertise, believe it or not, is more in the punk indie realm. But I do try to listen to it as much as I can. But yeah, right now in terms of like popular music, most of the students here at Full Sail are usually more into underground things. They're always mentioning bands. I have no idea who they are. But even if you just look at like what's popular in terms of top 40, yeah, it's this weird hybrid thing that's going on now, where it's not entirely hip hop, it's not entirely pop, it's not entirely EDM, but it's a weird sort of fusion that's going on right now of all those things. Josh, I don't know what you mean to link to something in the chat. You can probably share a URL if that's what you're talking about. Just make sure it's appropriate. I hope it's not something. Where was I? Oh yeah, royalty free. So royalties come into play when you sometimes have to negotiate, for example, with another artist in the music world. You'll typically pay that person royalties. But for smaller stuff like a single image or things like that, you can purchase things royalty free. And then you're subjected to the associated guidelines. Once you purchase a material, you can typically use the material as many times as you want, including for for-profit projects. Okay, so if you buy that photo, it's essentially yours. That's what you paid for. That's why you paid for a royalty-free image. It's yours. Use it as many times as you like. Use it for 50 years. Use it in whatever thing you want, even if it's designed to generate money. Nina says, if you pay royalties for it and someone else uses it... Oh, you mean like double dipping? That's a good question. I would guess it would have to do with if they're mimicking it in the exact same way that you did. I can't think of an example off the top of my head. But yeah, if you're using someone else's beat or maybe their 5-second loop, in a unique, interesting way. Because, by the way, the reason why Kanye West and people of that ilk are really, really talented is because they're never just taking something and throwing it in the song. They're typically transforming it, speeding it up a little bit, or changing its sound quality, or making it ripple, or making it bend. So yeah, if someone else is doing it in the sort of exact same way that you are, I would guess, but I'm not a lawyer, that that's infringement. But typically that person would be, yeah, I don't know, that'd be a good question. Would they have to pay copyright royalties to both the original copyright holder and you? Hopefully you would just try to avoid that problem. But these are the issues we get into in 2014 that we never really had to deal with before. It makes things crazy. And then it gets into other interesting issues like, for example, what is it? Is it? I can't remember. GarageBand? Is that the one that provides Fruity Loops? But anyway, you have these different software sound programs that provide loops, and I want to say it was Rihanna. She had a song that was entirely created from software loops, which is interesting because I wish I'd researched the story. I just heard this in passing. I forget, a couple weeks ago, actually. I can't remember where I heard this story. I don't know if it was in my random reading for this class or if I heard it in an interview or something. But that she she had a song written for her that was entirely made up from the loops that you typically find already provided in software that you normally don't have to cite, because that's why they're provided as loops for you to use. Okay, real quickly, a couple other areas. Public domain. This refers to the area that when copyright protection ends and is not renewed, then it enters public domain. This is typically under controversy as well, mostly because of Disney, which is here in Orlando, so I'm not supposed to say anything bad about Disney, but Disney, the Gershwin family, and some other people are really fighting to get copyright extended, because copyrights on things like Mickey Mouse are about to expire, and when those expire, basically anyone can use them. So Mickey Mouse is a pretty important symbol of under Disney's watch, so obviously they would like to keep control of that for as long as possible. But the whole point of copyright is that it's supposed to only extend for a certain amount of time, and when that time expires, it then enters public domain. Okay. And if anybody, I don't know if anybody here plays an instrument, but like you can find lots of interesting stuff in public domain. Like you could find sheet music that's typically from before 1920, and it's all free. So whether you play classical music or ragtime music, like all that stuff is free. So you never have to go and pay for it because it's no longer protected by copyright. Old books, right? So if you want to read Wuthering Heights, or you want to read Tale of Two Cities, or you want to read Huckleberry Finn, you don't have to purchase those books unless you just like having them in book form. They're also part of public domain. In general, this stuff probably won't make too big of an impression for you in terms of your careers, but be aware of it. You never know. Like one great way to work around copyright issues is just to find an old song that's no longer under copyright protection. Who knows? Maybe you can do something incredible with it. Maybe you can use part of it in whatever song that you're working on. So that's what happens when copyright expires. Questions? Yes, Josh. Technically, Disney World is in Kissimmee, which is essentially a suburb of Orlando. But for the people who aren't here in Orlando, it's much easier just to refer to it as O-Town, as I like to call it. But yeah, all the theme park stuff is actually outside the city. I don't understand links. Give me links. I don't have any links. Here, let me go ahead and stop the recording because I think the most useful stuff is already passed.